Oh, obviously. So I'm gonna have to be perplexed again. Oh, is it running already? It's running. Excellent. Let's go. Good. Today we are going to talk about a very, very interesting bracha. You may know that in Masechet Brachot, the very first tractate in Shas, there is in the middle a very, very interesting daf that talks about very unusual blessings. There is a blessing, for example, to be made if you see a very wise Jewish scholar. There's another blessing to make if you see a very wise non-Jewish scholar. A blessing that we make if you see a Jewish king. A blessing you make if you see a non-Jewish king. All sorts of situations in which you make a brachot. And among this list of unusual brachot that you say, there is a blessing to be recited if you see 600,000 Jews. If you find yourself in the company of 600,000 Jews, there is a special blessing to make, and the blessing is Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed are you Hashem, Elokeinu Melech Haolam, King of the world, Chacham Harazim. Chacham Harazim is God is the Chacham, the wisdom of Razim are like secrets. So God who unlocks the wisdom of the secrets, a very unusual blessing. So why is this the blessing? Why is this the blessing that we make when we spend our time with 600,000 Jews? So what we're going to do is we are going to divide our discussion into three parts. The first part is the source of this blessing and three ways to understand the blessing. That's part number one. So the source, we look at the Gemara and then commentators on the Gemara to come to three understandings of the blessing. The 2 and 3 are related, let's say 2.5. And then after that, we're going to part 2, is we're going to the Rambam, Maimonides, adds a very interesting caveat to this blessing. We're going to look at how the Rambam adds to the blessing. That's part number 2. And then finally, we're going to talk about halacha lema'aseh. What happens if you find yourselves in the company of 600,000 Jews? Now, today's class is very, very important because Be'ezrat Hashem tonight, Moshiach is going to come. We're going to all run down. We're going to get the light railway to the old city, and we're going to run down to the old city, and then we're going to be in the company of 600,000 Jews. And then we'll say, oh, I remember once learning something about 600,000. Do we make a blessing? Do we not? And now you'll be there and you'll know what to do. So I'm going to make sure to complete the discussion today so that you do not find yourselves in limbo, not knowing what to do between this week and next week. Because I hope Be'ezrat Hashem for all of us, this should be halacha lema'aseh, a bracha that we'll all be able to make together, B'viat Moshiach tonight. Okay, so I'm going to start with the source. The source should not come as a surprise to you, from Masechet Brachot. Masechet Brachot, the very first tractate in Shas that talks about the laws of blessings. And this is what the Gemara says. V'amar Rav Hamnuna. So there's a long list. Yeah, maybe we'll another week talk about some of the other brachot there. The Gemara lists a wide variety of unusual brachot that we make. But I'm only going to focus on the particular brachot that we're talking about. Amar Rav Hamnuna. Rav Hamnuna taught Haro'eh Uchlusei Yisrael. Somebody who sees a large gathering of Jewish people, Omer Baruch Chacham Harazim, makes the blessing of blessed are you, the Chacham Harazim, the wise of the secrets. That's a terrible translation. Well, maybe through the commentators we'll come to a better translation of the phrase Chacham Harazim through the three ways of understanding what that means in a few minutes. So we won't translate it. We'll leave it as the phrase, make the blessing of Chacham Harazim. Okay, so that's the teaching of Rabbi. And then we get to a Braita. A Braita is a teaching from the time of the Mishnah that was not included in the Mishnah. So this is old. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught, Haro'eh uchlusei Yisrael. Somebody who sees a gathering of Jews, Omer, Baruch Chacham Harazim, blessed are you Hashem, Chacham Harazim, She'ein da'atam domeh zeh lezeh, because they do not agree with one another, Ve'ein partzufeihen domim lezeh, and they all look different one from the other. So I'm blessing the fact that you have a wide, all different types of, we're all part of the Jewish nation, and yet everyone thinks something else. You hear that? Now let's continue. Ben Zomeh Ra'a Uchlusa Al Gab Ma'aleb Harabait. So Ben Zoma was once found himself looking over Harabait, over the Temple Mount. Amar, and he saw 600,000 Jews. Amar Baruch Chacham Harazim Uvaruch Sheparak Kol Einu L'Sham Sheni. Blessed are you, Chacham Harazim, and blessed are you, Hashem, that all these people serve God. Okay, so from here we see this idea of if you find yourself in the company of a huge number of Jewish people, you make a blessing of Chacham Harazim. There's something about the diversity of seeing everybody. We all believe in one God. We all open the Siddur and we all say the same words, and yet we all look different, and we all have different opinions. That's a very, very powerful idea. In the general society, the fact that everyone looks different and has different ideas, that makes sense because, we live in a very diverse society. But within the Jewish community, where we are connected, where we all pray at the same time, where we make the same blessings, when our lifestyles are the same, and yet within that, there's so many different types of people. For that reason, we make the blessing of Chacham Harazim. That's the Talmud. Very powerful idea. Clear, Joy? Okay, we're going to come to now 3 interpretations. The simple, I wouldn't say the simple, but I would say Rashi's interpretation, who really just explains exactly what this means, defines it for us. Uchlusei. So we saw this word uchlusei. Uchlusei literally means like a population, like a large number of people. So Rashi tells us, how many people do you make the blessing over? Shishim Rivo. That's where we know that it needs to be 600,000 people. Rashi tells us that the Gemara tells us about a large number of people. Rashi says, how many people is a large number of people? The answer is 600,000. Now, how did Rashi get to number 600,000? We'll get to that. Yes, Yosef, thank you so much for asking a question. You are a gift.
I just later look at because how can you count 600,000 and it's
how can you count them?
It's also legal to count Jewish people.
Oh, that is brilliant. That is such a good question.
Isn't also the area considered an Ewu visit up until 600,000 or 900,000?
600,000. The number is 600,000. Yosef, that is a really good question. How can I ever know if I'm in the company of 600,000 people?
Count the number of kippot, for example.
It's impossible, almost impossible. It's
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Also, if you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Wait, don't go. You're the last one.
Yeah, like
it's impossible they're not moving.
Like in a minyan, I obviously see people, unfortunately, saying like doing this, like counting people individually. But I was always taught to count, let's say, the number of talitot there are, or the number of kippot, or let's say count something like a shoe or something.
Yeah, so I wasn't going to talk about counting Jews now, but that's a very, very...
He's the one that brought it up.
Another issue.
Good point. No, it's a good point.
Counting Jewish people is not really allowed. So even if you're counting a minyan, you should just say the words of a certain Tehillim. It has 10 words in it. So, like King David, He counted the people, and then there was 70.
Yeah, absolutely, very quite right. Yes.
That's why many rabbanim will say count something like the number of kippot. You see, for example, you're counting an object rather than the person.
That's a really good question, Yosef. The truth is, well, as we will see when we get to the halakha l'maaseh at the end, you never physically count 600,000 people. Let's say, I know that we'll talk about this. Maybe I'll mention it briefly now. That the biggest event, I think this is true, the biggest event in Israel's history. Does anyone know what the biggest event was? When I say the biggest, the largest attendance. No, in Israel, in the modern state of Israel. In the modern state of Israel? No. But they're quite right. I think that's the second biggest. Rav Ovadia Yosef, when Rav Ovadia Yosef passed away, according to police estimates, there were 800,000 people there.
I thought Rav Kanievsky had more. I think he had slightly more than Rav Ovadia.
So the truth is, I mean, they were both huge levayot. You're quite right. They were both huge levayot. But there, no one counted. There's like a helicopter going above, and they have all this. Nowadays, you don't actually count. I don't know how they do it. You take a picture, and a computer figures out how many people there are.
Measure the area and then how many people estimate in there.
See, there you are. You know what? Yeah, there you are. So that solves your question.
Rav Kanievsky is 400,000 up to 7.5, and I will check.
So Rav Ovadia, people say was 800,000. But for those people who say it was 7.5, then they would need to make the blessing of Chacham Arazim at the Levi. We'll talk about that. Yeah.
700,000.
Okay. So
we don't know because Rav Kanievsky could have more or less.
Yes.
Most.
Okay. So the truth in the context of your question, Yosef, and your question is a good question. Within the context of 600,000 people, you're never going to count 600,000 people. The only way you'd know is by, calculating an area. I know that there's 100 people in this area, and I can see there's 1,000 people, and I know there's 600 of these areas here, so it must be 600,000 people here. Yeah, that's how you wouldn't count people, but you're quite correct that we do not count Jews. Why? There are lots of reasons. Because our power is not in our numbers. If you think 4 people, if one person can do it, and then 2 people can do that, then you make false assumptions of how strong they are but our strength is not in our numbers. And we shouldn't, like each holy Jewish neshama, you shouldn't reduce it to a number. And that's why when you count using a pasuk, so I point to you and I don't say 1, but I point to you and I say Hoshia. And then I point to you and I don't say the number 2, but I say the next word, and I give each person a word of a pasuk. So I'm not reducing you to a number, but I'm giving you a word from pasuk, which is a more honorable way to do it. So it's a good question, but I suppose in our context you're not actually counting. Okay, so Rashi says 600,000 people, and Shmuel's research seems to indicate that there have been events in Israel with over 600,000 people in them. Okay, Chacham Arazim. Chacham Arazim, what does the phrase Chacham Arazim mean? It means, according to Rashi, Hayodea ma shebelev kol elu. So God who knows the secrets, meaning that you have 600,000 people here, but there's 600,000 heads, and each head is thinking something else. Even now, we've got in this room a couple of heads, but then what people thinking? So I don't know. We don't know what anyone else is thinking. I can't know what anyone else is thinking. But if you can have 600,000 heads, each one coming up with a chidushei Torah, let's say, obviously, and then you have God who knows what each one of them is thinking. So there's the God who's wisdom beyond what has actually happened. You can see inside everybody. That's Rashi's understanding, and it's an acknowledgement of how incredible Hashem is. So I know in theory obviously God knows what's happening to everybody all the time. But then when I find myself in the context of 600,000 people, and I realize, wow, just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mamash with me every minute, so too he's with every single other person here right now. That realization in their company is what what would motivate me to make this bracha chacham arazim. Does that make sense? It's the awareness of hashgacha pratit, divine, like a intervention or providence or involvement or awareness. There's 600,000 people here. Each one has an individual communications with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's the first interpretation. That is the interpretation of Rashi. That's number one. Now let's go to number two. Number two is the Maharsha. Maharsha, as you may know, is also a commentator on the Gemara. It's in source number 3 on the source sheet. What does Chacham Arazim mean? And he explains something more. He says, just like Rashi says that in order to make this blessing, you need to have 600,000 people. Now, does the number 600,000 ring a bell to anybody? Yes! Excellent! There were 600,000 men at Matan Torah. Exactly. Kol hadeot. Then he says, Shishim revot deot mechulakim, v'hu klal kol hadeot she'al korchach natna Torah l'shishim revot b'midbar liyot haTorah klula mikol de'ah v'chochma ve'ein losif alea מה שאומרים חז"ל, כל מה שמחדש כל חכם בדורו מסיני הוא לפי שזה הדבר כבר היה בדת אחת מאותן 60 ריבו שהיו בסיני, כי אי אפשר שיהיה עוד דת אחרת על 60 ריבו. Now this is a big chidush, he's telling us something that I wouldn't have known. The Maharsha is saying something very, very, it's a very, very clever idea here. He's saying, why was the Torah given to 600,000 people? The reason why the Torah was given to 600,000 people is because there are a total of 600,000 ways to understand the Torah. And therefore there had to be 600,000 men there to receive the Torah in order that each one of them could understand the Torah differently. But it's no more than 600,000. You follow? There's no more than 600,000 ways of understanding the Torah. So we've all got a lot of homework there, but there's no more than 600,000 avenues to understanding Torah.
It could be problematic if you have 600,000 different viewpoints and understandings of the Torah. How would Am Yisrael be able to progress in a unified manner?
Oh, we're going to come to that in a minute. Oh, Alec, can I answer your question?
Sure.
Maybe I'll there's a lovely book by Rabbi Sachs. Rabbi Sachs wrote a lovely book called One People, with a question mark at the end. And in this book, One People, there is a chapter called Halachic Pluralism. And in the chapter called Halachic Pluralism, in the book One People, Rav Sachs, makes a very, very interesting observation about diversity of opinion. There is in halakha, as you probably know, a concept of Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim. These and these are the words of the living God. And what Rabbi Sachs says, there are two types of arguments. There is a halachic argument and an agadic argument. So in a halachic argument, like between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel, even nowadays between the Aruch HaShulchan and the Shulchan and the Mishnah Berurah, or between Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, whenever you have an argument, right, you have to make a decision. Well, when I say you have to make a decision, when there's a halachic argument, you have to know what to do. So we need to have uniformity in practice. So you might have an argument between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel about how to light Hanukkah candles. Do you light Hanukkah candles 1 to 8 or 8 to 1? Now, they're both the words of the living God, but the Jewish people have to pick one. Because you can't have half of the Jewish people lighting 1 to 8, and the other half of the Jewish people lighting 8 to 1. So therefore, when it comes to halakha, there has to be a system through which we can come to a halachic ruling, and the principle in the Gemara is that we always follow the majority opinion. We always follow the majority opinion. So if there's one rabbi against the rabbis, meaning one particular rabbi arguing against the rest of the rabbis, we'll always go with the rabbis as opposed to the dissenting opinion. Why? Because when it comes to halakha, not that one is right and one is wrong, just in order to maintain uniform practice in the Jewish people, you have to make a decision and say, we're going to follow Beit Hillel. Is that clear? So in terms of halakha, there are many, many voices, but there has to be a decision. You know, the rabbinic authorities in every generation have to make a decision in order to maintain unity, halachic unity. This is the way we do things. I'm not talking about customs. I'm talking about, Yom Kippur means this, or, like the biblical prohibitions. You can't have arguments about core ideas. There has to be halachic uniformity. Everyone agrees when Shacharit is, and everyone agrees when Mincha is. Everyone agrees when Mariv is. Some people say these words, some people slightly different words. That's fine. But it's, the core ideas are the same. That is called halachic uniformity within a world of plurality. So there are different voices, but halakha requires one decision. Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, as we said. However, when it comes to Agadah, there are arguments in Agadah. In Agadah, we can say Elu va'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, and I don't need to say this one's right and this one's wrong. Because really, just like in Halakha, we're not saying that we follow Beit Hillel because he's right, and we don't follow Beit Shammai because he's wrong. No, they're both right. Elu va'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. But for the sake of uniformity, halachic uniformity, we have to follow one of the positions. And therefore, we follow Beit Hillel. However, when there's a debate that has no halachic ramifications, then you don't need to arrive at a conclusion. Does that make sense to you? So that answers, so I can have diversity within the Jewish conversation, if you want to call it that, but it has to be in the right areas. Does that make sense? Okay, so the Maharsha has explained very beautifully, I think, that the reason why we make a blessing when we see 600,000 people, because there are 600,000 people were there receiving the Torah, 600,000 different people receiving the Torah, 600,000 different ways of looking at the story. So then when you have another group of 600,000 people, we say, wow, this group of people might contain all of the positions in understand. This could be the entirety of Torah knowledge in this room. You follow? Because just like at Mount Sinai, there were 600,000 different people thinking about Torah. Here again, there's 600,000 people together, Jewish people all together. Does that make sense? So having this group together could represent the entirety of Jewish thought. Does that make sense? That's the Maharsha. I'm going to read that last sentence again, because that is really a very good sentence. Lefi shezeh hadavar kfar haya b'dat achat me'otam 60 ribo. These are different opinions of the 600,000 shayu b'Sinai. And these people were all at Mount Sinai. Ki efshar. It's impossible sheyeh od dat acheret al 60 ribo. There is no more than 600,000 because there were 600,000 people at the Mount Sinai experience. Is that clear? Okay, those are the words of the Maharsha. So what blessing are we making? We're making the possible. We are sort of recreating the Mount Sinai experience when I have 600,000 people, 600,000 people together. Does that make sense? Because what I'm saying when I've got these 600,000 people is, just like at the Mount Sinai experience, there were 600,000 people all experiencing it in their own different way. Maybe the people here today, each one represents a different way of experiencing Torah. And this group may contain the entirety of Torah experience. Does that make sense to you? Position number 2. Joy? Okay. Now I added a little piece to position number 2 from the Shem Shmuel. And I just wanted, this is, I'm just going to go on a shorter diversion. Basically, whenever the Shem Shmuel comes up, I just can't hold myself back, and I just stick it in. Okay, so Shem Shmuel wrote a very important piece on Lag BaOmer. You know, Lag BaOmer commemorates the day where the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying, as you know. Now, does anyone know what Rabbi Akiva taught us? Rabbi Akiva taught us many things, but there's a phrase that became very famous because it's a song, and anything that becomes a song people know well. Rabbi Akiva said, "Va'ahavta l'orecha kamocha, ze klal gadol b'Torah." Love your neighbor as yourself. This is a very important principle of Torah. So if Rabbi Akiva, who was the one who taught love your neighbor as yourself, that's a great principle of Torah, how is it that his students are the ones that didn't show respect for one another? You follow? Does it make sense to you? So the Shem Shmuel explains, and this is a very, very powerful model. I think it connects a little bit to the question you were asking a minute ago. He says there is a problem with unity and there is a problem with diversity. And as we will see, the students of Rabbi Akiva learned through this how to combine the two. What's the problem with unity? The problem with unity is that, there's a phrase in English, maybe even in American, that familiarity breeds contempt. Have you heard of that idea? The more you know somebody, the more you may, God forbid, take them for granted. So let's say on my first date, I discover that she likes peppermint tea. So then on the second date, I'll make sure to bring her a peppermint tea. But then after 15 years of marriage, I'll be, oh my gosh, you're still asking? Make for yourself. So that's like familiarity breeds contempt. The closer you say, well, you do what you don't need me to. You know, like before we knew each other, I was being nice to you. But now that we're friendly, you know, like calm down. In the context of the yeshiva here, I'm guessing, I'm very nervous to say this, but I hope this is true. I would imagine it's very unlikely for you to have an argument with your roommate on your first night in the room. Because the first night everyone's getting to know each other, they're all sweet to one another. But after you've been in the room together for a month, so then you start taking, that's when arguments start happening. Familiarity breeds contempt. Often the closer you get to somebody, the less you respect them. You know what I mean? The teenagers have this as well. I mean, I don't want to go into too many examples, but teenagers, as a teenager, I'll tell you a terrible, terrible thing. I hope none of you did like adolescence. Like when, you have your mother wants to speak to you, and don't talk to you.
Especially while you're playing video games.
Yeah, and then, I know, this neighbour down the road that you only met 6 months ago comes knocking on the door, and you're the politest pal. Yes, how can I help you? Like, to your mother, you treat your mother like, and then somebody you hardly know. It's all the same idea. And the problem with Rabbi Akiva's students is they became very, very close to one. They became close, and when you become so close to somebody, you start not treating them with respect. So what's the solution to that? That's exactly this Shishim Rivot, this 600,000. It's 600,000 different people. You follow? You have to understand that everyone around you is different to you. And as soon as you realize that the people around you are different to you, then you show them a little bit more respect. The example that Shem Shmuel gives is funny, but it's good. Let's say here, I'm about to have a drink. So let's say I take this cup, and I'm in the middle of the drink now, and it's been delicious, so thank you very much to Hanan El. Let's say I drink this drink. So my mouth doesn't say to my hand, "Oh, that's so sweet of you. Thank you for bringing it so smoothly." Why? Because it's all part of the same thing. You follow? Like the mouth and the hand, they're all part of the same body. So they don't. It's not. They show no respect for one another. So when we become so close to each other, sometimes we can become too close to somebody else, and as a result of getting too close to someone, it's ironic, but then I lose respect for them. It's a terrible, terrible curse. Yeah.
There's also the concept of when you're in something that's familiar, after a while, you want something different.
Oh, so that might be true. That's not what I'm talking about here.
I know, I'm saying I'm just adding.
Yeah, that's true. You're right.
Not just the familiarity breeding contempt, but also breeding contempt for the familiarity. Like some people just want something, always want something different.
Yeah, so that's true, but that's not. My point here is just focusing on taking people for granted. You know, somebody does something for you again and again and again. Eventually, you take them for granted, and that's a terrible thing. Why? Because just like my hand over, you expect him to do it, but they've got no response. You know, why should they do it? There, but as soon as I can see someone is different from me, I have more respect for them. That is exactly the blessing that we spoke about according to the Marasha. We're saying that there's 600,000 different people. Here, just he says over here, Shishim Rivod De'ot Mechulakin. 600,000 people who all think differently. So we're blessing this diversity. In the words of the Shem Shmuel, he says, now, Hine Ba'adam Pratim, no, we spoke about this. I'm just going to jump. Here, Ha'emet Enoken, I'm on the last of the bottom part of source 4. Kol Tzaddik, every righteous person, and we are indeed in the company of righteous people here. Yesh lo et hamador mishelo. Everyone has got their place. Ve'inot domeh la'adam acher. And they are not similar to anybody else, meaning each person is unique. So if I don't see you as an extension of me, but I see you for your uniqueness, do you follow that? Each person is judged for who they are. Now this is a very, very important idea, because what we're saying, according to the Shem Shmuel, and we saw this in the Marashal earlier, this appreciation of this diversity. You follow? We are different to one another. When I understand that you're different, so then I treat you different. Then I'll have more respect for you. Does that make sense to you? I'll give you a terrible, terrible example. I don't know if this is it's an awful example. And if anyone can knock it down, you're welcome to knock it down. But I think it might might explain this. Oh, it's good for you actually. This is an example. When a few years ago, in fact about 20 something years ago, my wife and I, Hannah and I, were blessed with a set of twins, Baruch Shem. And they're really wonderful people. They're both they're married, all of them. We have 2 sets of twins, and they're all married. But when they were first born, it was quite hectic, I would say, because children tend to stay up during the night. They don't sleep. At the beginning they don't sleep very much, and then when you have 2, and then you have 4, and they're all very little. Anyway, so we would decide when you're navigating who should sleep when. If I see you as I see myself, so if I can function on 4 hours sleep, so you can also function on 4 hours sleep because we're the same. You follow? But if I understand, no, I'm me and these are my strengths, and you are you and those are your strengths. So then when I see you as different, but I don't assume that everything I can do, you can do, and everything that you can do, I can do, then you are able to create a system in which each person does what they need to do. Does that make sense to you? But it only works if you're able to see people around you as different to you. It's really a very convoluted example, and maybe probably unnecessarily complicated. But the point is the value of seeing the difference in somebody else. So when I have 600,000 people, I realize that's 600,000 different opinions. Not 600,000 different people, 600,000 different opinions. Is that clear to everybody? Okay, that's number 2. Reason number 2. Let's go to reason number 3, and then we can move on to the Rambam. Reason number 3 is Rav Kook. Okay, the truth is, reason number 3 is a continuation of number 2. Rav Kook writing, he wrote a commentary on the Agadata. So everything, we're going to look at Rav Kook twice, both times quoting from his commentary on the Gemara in Brachot. So Rav Kook writes like this: Ra'ui la'adam lehargil atzmo b'savlanut le'inyan techunot v'deot hafuchot me techunotav v'deotav hu. So it's important for us to develop patience for people who think differently to us. She'achzov zeh harei av shel einai hapratiyim nir'im she'im tohelet b'chunotahem u'ledeotahem v'hem hafachim me'atchuna she'ayishara aval lifnei chacham harazim baruch hu. In God's eyes, God sees all of it. The bracha, according to Rav Kook, of chacham harazim is the ability. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he looks at these 600,000 people accepting upon themselves Torah, and these 600,000 people accepting Torah, each one different to everybody else in the way that they accept Torah. So these 600,000 different people, each one mekabel aleihem ol malchut shamayim, accepting upon themselves the yoke of heaven and accepting the Torah on them. Each one of them, God held the mountain over their heads, and they said, as we read in this week's parasha, they all said Na'aseh v'nishma. So these 600,000 people that all went through that experience, so God had a relationship with each one of them. So too, when I spend, I encounter this group of 600,000 people, just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu was able to accept and to understand each one. So I can't understand, I can only understand my perspective, but I make the blessing in recognition that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a relationship with each one of them. Does that make sense to you? That's the Chacham HaRazim. So perhaps the difference between the Maharsha is looking at it from our perspective that we need to get on, but then Rav Kook is looking at it from God's perspective. Does that make sense to you? Okay. So those are 3 reasons why we make the blessing of Chacham HaRazim, and all of them are talking really to some extent about the idea of diversity, of seeing different people. All of them within the Torah community, obviously. Okay, so that's the end of part number 1. Now I want to go to part number 2 of 3. And I want to look at the Rambam and commentaries on the Rambam. That's part number 2. And then at the end, I want to talk about Rav Ovadia Yosef's Levaya and what people did at his Levaya. Halacha L'Maaseh. That'll be the 3rd part. So, let's go to the Rambam. Look at the Rambam in source number 6. Haro'eh, somebody sees Tof Reish Elef, that is 600,000 people, Ke'echad. Ve'im Yisrael Heim, if they are Jewish, or Ve'eretz Yisrael, and if they are in the land of Israel, Omer Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, Chacham HaRazim. Blessed are you, Hashem, King of the world, Chacham HaRazim. And we can take whichever one of the 3 interpretations to understand those words. Now, does everyone see what the Rambam has done here? The Rambam has added something that wasn't here previously. Rambam says that when do you say the bracha of Chacham HaRazim? Im Yisrael Heim or Ve'eretz Yisrael. Do you see that? He adds in something that we didn't see until now. When do you say the bracha of Chacham HaRazim? Only in the land of Israel. So if I see 600,000 Jews in California, or if I see 600,000 Jews in Melbourne, you don't say Chacham HaRazim. You only say Chacham HaRazim if you're in the land of Israel. Those are the words of the Rambam. Is that clear to everybody? But it's interesting, we didn't see that beforehand. We didn't see it. Where did the Rambam get that idea from? So, the Kesef Mishnah. Does anyone who wrote the Kesef Mishnah?
Yes, Karo.
Excellent. Kesef Mishnah, written by Rav Yosef Karo on the Rambam, writes, source number 7. Umasha katav Rabbeinu of Eretz Yisrael, that which a Rambam writes, that you only say this blessing in Eretz Yisrael, he quotes Rabbeinu Manoach, Shelamad Cohn, Mida Ita B'Gemara, the story of Ben Zoma. But with Ben Zoma, when did Ben Zoma make the blessing? Ben Zoma made the blessing when he saw 600,000 Jews on Temple Mount. Do you remember that? Bahara Bait. Mashma Dafka Beretz Yisrael. So from the fact that the story, we have the law that you say Chacham Arazim. That's what the Gemara told us. Nachon? And then we have the story of Ben Zoma, and Ben Zoma said this blessing in the land of Israel, from which Rabbeinu Manoach learns you only say the blessing in the land of Israel. V'lo nihira. However, Rav Yosef Karo doesn't like this answer, because if we're learning from Ben Zoma that it has to be in the land of Israel, based on the story from Harabayit, why say the land of Israel? Say this only applies on Harabayit. You follow? Meaning, it's true that the Temple Mount is in Israel, but why should that be the Temple Mount, or say in Jerusalem, or say in Yehuda? Why decide that that's the boundary that you're going to bind this? You're going to limit this. So that's a question of Rav Yosef Karo on Rabbeinu Manoach's understanding of the Rambam. Is that clear? Okay. ואפשר שתם רבנו מתאמר עולה אין אוכלוסייה בבבל, כלומר שאף על פי שיראה ש60 ריבו אין להם דין אוכלוסייה לברך עליהם. He says, perhaps there's no such thing as a Jewish community, there's no gathering of Jews outside of the land of Israel. Now what does he mean by that? He lived in Israel, don't forget. He's saying that to be a community, that only exists in the land of Israel. That we might perchance have 600,000 people together, but 600,000 people outside of Israel doesn't have the same impact. It's not an ukhlusiyah, we're not populating, we are guests. There's a difference between 600,000 guests and 600,000 residents. So I'm saying the blessing when I'm a resident, not as a guest. Does that make sense? I think it's a very, very powerful idea. But he have to say, but the Kesef Mishnah, Rav Yosef Karo didn't like this answer either. The Kasha Ita B'Gemara B'Perek HaNazir, the Rav Chanina Berei the Rav Ika Barich a Rav Papa V'Rav Huna Berei the Rav Yoshua Baruch Chacham Arazim Mishum Tahabu Chashivi Alei Kashishim Rivo. So we see the Gemara tells us about rabbis that did make the blessing of Chacham Arazim outside of the land of Israel. So the truth is, we don't actually have a good answer. We don't have a good answer until we will get to Rav Cook in a minute. We don't have a good answer. With the Rav Yosef Karo brought 3 reasons to try to explain why it might be. 2 reasons, I'm sorry. The Rav Yosef Karo brought 2 reasons to explain why it might be that we would only make the blessing of Chacham Arazim in the land of Israel, but he rejects both answers. He himself doesn't take either of the answers. So we're left with the question, why does the Rambam say that we only make this blessing in the land of Israel? Now, if you go to source number 8, it says in source number 8, Haro'eh shishim rivom Yisrael biyachad. If you see 600,000 Jews together, Omer, you make the blessing, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam Chacham Arazim. Blessed are you, Hashem, King of the world, Chacham Arazim. So the Shulchan Aruch, who normally follows the Rambam, in this instance does not follow the Rambam. And he does not limit the blessing to the land of Israel, even though the Rambam does. Now, what's halakha l'maaseh? So I did a little research this week, every time I went to shul in the last couple of days, I went to the bookcase where they keep all the Sidurim, and I opened up all the Sidurim to see if the bracha is in the Sidur, and if it's in the Sidur, when does the Sidur say you need to say the blessing? So I have to say, I looked at many different Sidurim, and I only found the bracha mentioned in 2 of the Sidurim. I didn't see an art scroll Siddur, so I didn't check the art scroll, which is a well-known, but most of the Siddurim that I looked at did not include the bracha. You know, there's a page where all the brachot exist. Most of the Siddurim I looked at did not have it, apart from 2. One of them is the Siddur of Cohn. Do you know the Cohn Siddur? Ah, is it here? Oh, that's a machzor of art scroll. So the Cohn includes it, and the other one here, Rinat Yisrael, and the Rinat Yisrael. Oh, but look at this. Here's an art scroll Siddur. Now, in both the Cohn and the Rinat Yisrael, the instruction was, if you find yourself in the company of 600,000 Jews in the land of Israel. So both the Cohn Siddur and the Rinat Yisrael Siddur went like the Rambam against the Shulchan Aruch. You follow? And said you only say the blessing in the land of Israel. And now I'm excited to say that we're now going to see what's the story in the art scroll. Here we are. Blessings over, is it going to be praise and gratitude? 244, let's have a look. Oh, I'm quite excited here. Oh my gosh! It's here. Yes, it is. That's very interesting. Oh, now we have it on page 246. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam chacham harazim. Blessed are you, Hashem, knower of secrets. Now, in the art scroll, it says over here, upon seeing 600,000 or more Jews together. So, the art scroll follows the Shulchan Aruch, the Rinat Yisrael, and the Cohn Siddur follow the Rambam. How interesting. Excellent. But I have to say, the majority of the Siddurim that I looked at, maybe I didn't look carefully enough, but the majority of the Siddurim, certainly the majority of the Hebrew Siddurim upstairs, other than the Cohn and the Rinat Yisrael, do not include the Siddur. So why does the Rambam say that you only say the blessing if you're in the land of Israel? Why does the Rambam say that? So Rav Kook explains, and maybe it's because of Rav Kook that the Rinat Yisrael Siddur and the Cohn Siddur limited the blessing only to the land of Israel. And Rav Kook says a really, really brilliant idea. I don't know if you've ever heard this idea before, about how, what's the relationship between the Jewish people and the land of Israel? The relationship between the Jewish people and the land of Israel is like the relationship between soil and a tree. So I don't know, when I was a kid, people used to get very excited about having apples from England. There was a certain climate in England which made very juicy apples. Because the whole country, the country is like, it rains a lot, cold a lot, miserable a lot, people moan a lot. I don't know what it is that makes it the right environment for apples. Moaning a lot, I imagine, is the main factor. But the fact is that if you plant an apple tree in England, it'll grow and it can be a very, produce fruit. If you try to grow an orange tree in England, you won't be quite as successful. You need a greenhouse. The environment is not the right environment to grow an orange. So Rav Kook explains, like a mashal, I suppose, that each one of us is like a seed. And if you put this sweet little neshama, all these sweet little neshamas around the room over here, and you put them in any land other than the land of Israel, they'll grow, but they won't flower in the same way.
It's very similar to Shul Torah, I think 3 weeks ago, by Rav Kutler, who was speaking about how Gedolei Yisrael in Chutz La'aretz, they're very smart, but in Eretz Yisrael, it makes a person not just Chacham smarter, but also speaks about how the fruits, whether it's a date or even something like an orange, yeah, the oranges in Florida are really good, but there's something that much different about an orange growing in Eretz Yisrael.
Oh,
That was in Rav Kutler's
yeah, fair. So I'm not talking about the fruit growing in this. I'm talking about the people. That we in the land of Israel, we flourish, and therefore, when it's 600,000 Jews in the land of Israel, in our natural habitat, that's when you celebrate it. It's a terrible, terrible analogy, but like it's the difference between an animal. Oh, I can't even. But like, there's a difference between an animal in captivity and an animal in their natural habitat. In a natural habitat, the animal expresses itself more freely. This is the healthier version. So we are in our natural habitat in the land of Israel. So I make the blessing, and we can follow all three of the positions of Rashi or the Maharsha or Rav Kook himself, talking about this diversity, the blessing of 600,000 ideas, 600,000 ways of looking at Torah, but it's 600,000 people in their natural environment. That's what I'm celebrating. And that's why it's only in the land of Israel that we make the blessing, because it's not just the people, but it's the people in their natural habitat where they're flourishing. And that's the blessing, the guarder of secrets. I can make that blessing when they are flourishing, because that's when our minds are sharpened. That's when we're coming up with our greatest ideas. Okay, so that's end of part number 2. Very interesting addition by the Rambam, not followed afterwards by the Shulchan Aruch. And then we have 2 types of Siddur. We have the Siddurim, like the Rinat Yisrael and the Cohn, that follow the position of the Rambam. And then you have Siddurim like the Art Scroll over here, who follow the position of the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, now the final question. What do we do? Listen to this. It could be in Cheshvan. Oh, maybe it was the English date was the 7th of October, 2013. 2013 is Tav Shin Samach Gimel. No, Ayin Gimel, sorry. Tav Shin Ayin Gimel. Rav Ovadia Yosef, the powerful, much-loved spiritual leader of Israel's Sephardi community, passed away in Jerusalem. After being hospitalized, he was 93 years old. He was later arrested on Monday night in the Jerusalem neighborhood Sanhedria with some 800,000 mourners converging from all over the country to attend what became the largest funeral in Israeli history. So the question is, if you attended the funeral of Rav Ovadia Yosef, should you have made the blessing of Chacham Arazim? Is this a blessing that I find myself among 600,000 people? Would I whip out the Siddur and make the bracha? So that's the question. Matem Choshvim?
Why not?
Oh. So the truth is, there was a big I imagine the reason why most of the Siddurim do not include this bracha, do not include it, is because it's very, very rare. It's very rare for us to find ourselves in the company of 600,000 Jews. Now, I remember I actually attended this funeral with my son, this funeral, and then with my sons, we went to the funeral of Rav Chaim Kanievsky, and in both cases, we did not make the bracha of Chacham Arazim. And the reason is because if you are in the 600,000 people, you can't actually see 600,000 people. These funerals were spread over streets. It wasn't like there was a big area and everybody was congregating in one big area, and then you could stand on the stage and see everybody. Or like when you're sometimes walking down to the Kotel, you can just see hundreds of thousands of people there. But if you were to observe 600,000 people, that's one thing. But if you're on the street and then it goes round this corner and it goes round that corner and goes ahead as well, that's a more problematic situation. And therefore the advice that we received was not to make the blessing. And indeed, I looked up, I don't even know who this rabbi is, but he was asked, if you make the blessing if you were at a funeral with 800,000 people, would you make the blessing? And his answer was not. And the reason why you would not make the blessing is because you can't actually see 600. It's not just being. It's not about being in 600,000 people. It's about observing, looking at 600,000 people. So if I'm in the crowd and I'm able to see 600,000 people, then I can make the blessing. But it's not about being in a group of 600,000 people. It's about looking at 600,000 people. So it's very possible that there were police helicopters. It's very possible that the police helicopter guy, looking from above, maybe they could have made the blessing of Chacham Harazim. But the people actually on the ground would not have made the blessing of Chacham Harazim. Okay. Yishar Koach. Questions? Comments? Everything clear to everybody? With that, we pause the fascinating topic of the blessing of Chacham Harazim. Yishar Koach to everybody. I hope Be'ezrat Hashem it will be